Welcome to the Mind Spark. Breaking news. Ontario has made a bold move by halting electricity exports to the U.S., a decision that has sent ripples across the continent. This action comes as a direct retaliation for the tariffs imposed by Trump, a move that has strained relations. The headline sent shockwaves from Washington to Ottawa, capturing the attention of both nations' capitals and beyond. Canada, long the U.S.'s reliable neighbor, had just pulled a major economic lever, signaling a shift in the dynamics of their relationship. Ontario's decision wasn't just a policy change, it was a declaration of independence and strength. In New York and Michigan, utility companies scrambled as calls flooded in from panicked business leaders worried about the implications. How could this happen? Weren't we allies? The question echoed in the minds of many on both sides of the border. In Canada, the mood was anxious but resolute as citizens discussed the unfolding events with a mix of concern and determination. Years of absorbing U.S. pressure had ended, something had snapped, and the Canadian spirit was now on full display. This was about more than electricity, it was about respect, sovereignty, and standing up for national interests. The power flowing across the border symbolized decades of trust and cooperation, now put to the test. Halting it was like cutting a vital artery, a dramatic move that underscored the seriousness of the situation. Energy markets spiked, but the deeper impact was psychological, shaking the confidence of investors and citizens alike. Canada was sending a clear message: it would not be a passive bystander in this trade war, but an active participant. In the American Midwest, factory managers dreaded their next energy bill, fearing the financial impact of this new reality. In Ontario's steel towns, workers wondered if this bold move would save their jobs or make things worse. As uncertainty loomed, politicians on both sides were caught off guard, forced to react to a fast-escalating crisis that demanded immediate attention. The once quiet border had become the front line of an economic conflict, a symbol of the growing tensions. The news rippled out, creating uncertainty and fear as people grappled with the potential consequences. The old rules of North American trade were being rewritten in real time, as the foundations of agreements like NAFTA were questioned. The shock was palpable, and the world was watching, as this story unfolded on the global stage. This was just the beginning of a story that would test the limits of a continental friendship, with unknown outcomes. The stakes had never been higher, as leaders on both sides navigated this unprecedented challenge. The crisis began days earlier with a stunning White House announcement. President Trump doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, citing national security, a move that baffled and angered Canadians. This wasn't a minor tweak, it was a sledgehammer to a deeply integrated economy. Canadian metals are essential to American cars and buildings. The tariffs felt less like a trade tool and more like self-sabotage. Business leaders on both sides were stunned as years of predictable supply chains unraveled overnight. The national security justification stung, given Canada's role in NORAD and joint defense projects. Prime Minister Trudeau condemned the move as an affront to workers on both sides of the border. Even some Republicans warned the tariffs would hurt American manufacturers and consumers, but Trump was convinced this would force concessions. Instead, it awakened a sleeping giant. Canada was ready to fight back. The stage was set for an unprecedented response. Suddenly found itself at the center of a national crisis. It was ground zero for the tariffs' impact, with industries bracing for a storm that threatened jobs and livelihoods. Steel mills and aluminum smelters faced immediate risk, with thousands of workers anxious about their future and the fate of their communities. The first decisive response came from Toronto, not Ottawa, as the province's leadership took center stage. Premier Doug Ford stepped up, defiant. "We will not be bullied. Ontario's workers are not pawns." His words echoed across the province, signaling a new resolve. Ford promised to use every tool at his disposal to defend local jobs, vowing to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ontario's workers. Behind the scenes, his government moved fast. Emergency meetings were called, economists and energy experts convened, and strategies were drawn up late into the night. Ontario's greatest leverage? Its electricity exports to the U.S., a vital resource that powered American homes and industries. If tariffs were a weapon, Ontario would respond in kind, making it clear that retaliation was on the table. The plan was bold: halt all electricity exports. It was a drastic but powerful message, one that would be felt on both sides of the border. Legal and logistical challenges loomed large, but the political will was unmistakable. Ontario was prepared to act, no matter the obstacles. Ford's tough stance resonated across the province, even among his critics, uniting Ontarians in a rare moment of solidarity. He framed the issue as one of provincial survival and national pride, urging citizens to stand together in defense of their future. Ontario had always been a fair partner. Now it was time to show that partnership worked both ways, and that respect was a two-way street. The province drew a line in the sand, making it clear that Ontario would not back down. The world watched closely, waiting for Ontario's next move. As the crisis took on international significance, Ontario was ready to fight for its future, determined to protect its people, its industries, and its place on the world stage. The trade war crashed into the lives of ordinary people, disrupting routines and shattering any sense of normalcy. News headlines and anxious conversations filled living rooms across North America. In Hamilton, Ontario, steelworkers faced deep uncertainty about their jobs and futures. The once busy mills grew quiet, and the fear of layoffs hung heavy in the air. South of the border, Michigan manufacturers reliant on Canadian metals saw costs soar overnight. Factory owners scrambled to adjust while workers worried about their next paycheck. A Detroit stamping plant faced a 30% jump in raw material costs. Layoffs loomed. The uncertainty rippled through entire communities, threatening local businesses and families alike. In border towns, families who lived and worked on opposite sides felt the strain. Daily commutes became fraught with anxiety, and cross-border relationships were tested as never before. A Canadian nurse and her American spouse suddenly found their finances at the center of an international dispute. Their plans for the future were thrown into doubt, and every bill became a reminder of the conflict. The invisible border became a wall of economic hostility, dividing neighbors and friends and making simple routines feel impossible. Construction in Toronto stalled. Ohio factories halted production. Projects were abandoned midway, and workers were left waiting for answers that never seemed to come. The ripple effects touched every corner of the integrated economy, from assembly lines to shipping docks, leaving no industry untouched. Trade statistics became real. Jobs, livelihoods, and dreams were on the line. For many, the numbers on paper translated into lost homes and forced relocations. Families on both sides paid the highest price for political decisions made far away. The stress seeped into every aspect of daily life, from dinner tables to retirement plans. The emotional toll was immense as uncertainty and fear became constant companions for thousands of workers and their loved ones. The human cost of the trade war was impossible to ignore. Communities rallied together, sharing stories of hardship and resilience, determined not to be forgotten. To grasp the shock of the tariffs, you have to understand the U.S. Canada economic bond. It's not just trade, it's a web of supply chains built over decades. A car might cross the border multiple times before it's finished. Canadian steel and aluminum are woven into American factories and vice versa. The tariffs threw chaos into this finely tuned system. The national security argument rang hollow. U.S. defense relies on Canadian materials. The North American industrial base is one system, not two. Harming one part hurts the whole. Ontario's electricity grid is another critical link, vital for U.S. states during peak demand. Ontario's threat targeted a point of real dependency. It was a strategic move that could unravel part of the American economy. Ontario recalibrated. An all-out blackout would hurt both sides. Instead, they imposed a fair trade surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. The surcharge matched the cost of U.S. tariffs on Ontario's metals, dollar for dollar. The message: for every dollar lost to tariffs, Americans would pay more for power. This was a targeted, proportional response focused on New York and Michigan. The surcharge hit American voters and businesses directly. Ontario's independent electricity system operator implemented the charge immediately. U.S. utilities locked into contracts had no choice but to pay. Suddenly, energy costs in Buffalo and Detroit soared. Governors faced political backlash as constituents demanded answers. The dynamic shifted. Ontario made the tariffs hurt back. The surcharge generated revenue, not just pain. Every dollar raised would support Canadian industries and workers hurt by the tariffs. Ontario moved fast to fulfill its promise. Surcharge revenue funded the Ontario Jobs and Competitiveness Fund. The fund provided direct support to laid-off workers and struggling companies. Steel mills and smelters received grants and loans to avoid layoffs and modernize. The goal, not just survive, but emerge stronger. The story became one of self-reliance and clever resistance. Public campaigns highlighted how American payments protected Canadian jobs. National unity and pride surged. Canada turned economic pain into fuel for a comeback. the strategy became a model for how a smaller nation could stand up to a larger power. The trade war and Canada's response reshaped North America. As U.S. electricity prices soared, political pressure mounted in Washington. Business groups and state leaders protested the tariffs, arguing they hurt Americans more than they helped. Canada's effective retaliation forced a rethink. Trade wars weren't so easy to win. Under pressure, the Trump administration rolled back the tariffs. Ontario lifted its surcharge. But things didn't return to normal. Canada learned the risks of overdependence on one partner. The government pushed for trade diversification, strengthening ties with Europe and Asia. The goal, a more resilient, globally minded economy. Canada emerged with new confidence and independence. The U.S. Canada relationship endured, but with a new respect. The crisis forced both sides to see their economies as a partnership, not a battleground. The northern lights had flickered, illuminating a new path for Canada's future.